Yeah. So my second company was in the advertising and gaming space.
Okay.
And I had this front row seat watching these companies be built and really hit their stride. And when my company was acquired, I had this hypothesis that habits would become more important. That as the interface shrinks, that as we went from desktops to laptops to mobile devices to wearable devices, and now with auditory devices like Amazon Alexa, the real estate to trigger people with external triggers would disappear, right? Just less room to trigger people with external triggers, which would mean that if your product is not something that people use habitually, you might not as well even exist.
Right.
If you're not on the home screen of someone's phone, if you're not top of mind as an Alexa skill so people can ask for it, they're gonna forget about you. And so habits are a huge competitive advantage. And so my idea was, how do you build habit-forming products? How do you build the kind of products that are used as much as people use Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack? What if we could use those same methods in all sorts of products? And that's exactly what's happened in the past 5 years since I published Hooked. Companies like Kahoot is the world's largest educational software. Gets kids hooked to in-classroom learning. Right. Byte Foods gets people hooked to eating healthier food options. A company I profile in this, we just published the second edition of Hooked, Fitbod, gets people hooked to exercising in the gym. So that's really the why I wrote this book. Google and Facebook, the video game companies, they've known these techniques forever. They're not. That's not who's buying my book. Who's buying my book, who's utilizing it, are the companies that want to build the kind of products that help people, that improve their lives, if they would only use the product. And so that's really my target audience.
Right, and that 4-part model that was super groundbreaking at the time was trigger, action, variable reward, and investments.
Right.
And I think the variable reward was something that threw me a curveball back in the day, because I was like, well, how is that addictive? And I was just wondering if you could talk us through maybe briefly those 4 parts, and how did you come up with that? Because maybe at the time you were like, oh, this seems normal to me, but it was pretty revolutionary stuff.
Yeah, it is old stuff in that variable rewards is B.F. Skinner, 1940s, 1950s stuff, where he took these pigeons, he put them in a little box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a little reward, so he could train the pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. By the way, if they didn't have the internal trigger of hunger, the experiment didn't work. Right. So you can't make pigeons or people do stuff they don't want to do. They still have to have that internal trigger, or it doesn't matter what mechanism you give them. If they don't want that thing, if they don't have the internal trigger, they're not going to act. Okay. So the experiment only worked when the pigeons were starved. But what Skinner observed was he could train those pigeons to peck at the disc, kind of like we would train a doggy or something, right? Through operant conditioning. But what he found was, one day he ran out of these food pellets. He didn't have enough of them one day. So he couldn't afford to give a food pellet every time the pigeon pecked at the disc. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, no reward, no food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times a pigeon pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because variability spikes activity in what's called the nucleus accumbens, creating this desirous response, this craving reflex. And so the most common example that we think of with variable rewards is slot machines.
Right?
Vegas. Exactly. It's the mystery, the uncertainty of what you might find when you play one of these games of chance. But of course, variable rewards are everywhere. Right? It's a big part of what makes something engaging. In Hooked, I talk about persistence hunting. How many people think that we used spears and arrows, firing them at animals from afar. That's totally not how we killed most animals. Our species survived through chasing down our prey. That the reason we are hairless apes is because we are meant to run. Born to Run, and many great books out there that talk about this persistence hunting aspect. That in fact, it's chasing that kudu, chasing that animal, that uncertainty, the unpredictability, the variability of where is that animal going to go next. That's what kept us chasing after that animal for hours and hours. And so in all sorts of experiences today that we find most engaging, most habit forming, the ones that grab our attention most, you find variable rewards.
What else? Tinder?
Of course. Well, romance in general. Even before Tinder. Of course, Tinder
Right.
has swipe left, swipe right. Who am I going to see next? What does that person think of me? Lots and lots of variability.
Right.
But romance itself.
Right.
When you first meet someone you're interested in, there's all that variability. Does she like me? What's going to happen? There's all that variability, the mystery. When you've been married to somebody for years and years, that the butterflies in the stomach go away, right? There isn't that same feeling. That's totally normal. You like them for other reasons. You fall in love, for other things about them. But that initial enchantment where you just can't stop thinking about them is about variability. The news, right? The first three letters of news, N-E-W. What's new? What's different, right? What don't I know? Movies, right? Why do we watch movies? We want to know what's going to happen at the end. Sports. Why do we watch sports? Watching that little ball bounce around a pitch or a field, what is it? It's nothing more than a slot machine mechanic. It's uncertainty. It's variability. And of course, when it comes to technology, scrolling that feed uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine. Right.